Welcome, welcome. I'll repeat this in a couple minutes for those of you that come in after this. But for those of you that haven't been to any of these calls before, okay, got the right microphone on. How it works is you can ask me anything. I have something that I will walk you through kind of as you maybe have questions. But first, if you have something top of mind, put it in the Q&A box and I will answer those first. If you are watching this on Facebook, you have to be in the Zoom room to actually ask questions, to be coached, to do all of the things. So if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A box. I don't think there's a chat. No, there's not a chat box anymore. Put them in the Q&A box. They only come to me and I'll start going through those and giving you some feedback and some coaching. And what we're going to start doing differently, if you want, is there should be a little virtual raise your hand button at the bottom of the screen. You can actually click on that button and then you can come on and we can have a two-way conversation about whatever it is you're struggling with or whatever it is you are working through. So I am going to walk you through something that I want you to think about, and it's related to self-confidence. And again, for those of you just coming in now, if you have a question, put it in the Q&A box. It can be about what we're talking about. It can be about absolutely anything. Nothing is ever off limits. And we'll kind of talk about any of that for you. But something that I hear most often when I ask someone, especially someone that I'm starting to work with or someone new that I haven't really talked to much before, like, why do you want to lose weight? The number one thing I hear over and over and over again is I want to be more confident. I want to have more confidence. I want to not only have confidence when I see my reflection, but I want to have confidence in just like my own ability. And so I think about confidence. I think there's kind of two ways that I think about having confidence. One is like confidence in just like who I am and just like that calm, grounded feeling. And then a confidence in my ability to do anything I want to do. And the kind of the relationship that I have with myself in that way, and confidence coming from how I think about myself, like my own perception of my own being, my own perception of kind of who I am. And so for all of you, this can be interactive. I want you to think about and put your responses in the Q&A. I'm going to ask you some questions and I'll go through an example that will maybe help you out as we do this, but I want you to tell me, how would you define self-confidence? Like when you think about why you want to be confident, like what is the confidence you're trying to obtain? Like what do you mean when you tell me you want to be more confident? Because that is by far, I'm trying to think of like if there's any woman I've ever talked to, whether or not we're working together or on any of our group calls, that I've asked like, okay, why do you want to lose weight? Why do you want to be naturally thin? And if it's not the first thing she says about being that she wants to be confident, it's like within the top three almost always. So put in the Q&A box, why is it important for you to be confident and what is confidence for you? So for me, confidence and self-confidence is a feeling of trust in my own ability. It's a feeling of trust because of the relationship I've developed with myself in my ability to do whatever I want to do whatever I say I'm going to do, to know that I'm going to show up and do all of the things, whether or not it's taking action. So like, I like to think too about confidence is like when I'm in a room with people, when I'm self-confident, it's so different than arrogant. Sorry, I was cutting sweet potatoes and like sort of chopped part of my finger off. But when I think about having confidence, I think about the ability to be in a room, in a group of people, to not say anything and to still have that feeling of confidence because of the certainty in the relationship I have with myself. So I don't think about confidence anywhere near arrogance, because I think arrogance is trying to like bolster up us up kind of in relation to someone else. So to me, arrogance is like not only like kind of putting myself on a pedestal, but then like judging other people, because it's like kind of like this I'm better than you energy. But confidence is just I'm confident. It has nothing to do with anyone else. And so ask yourself, put your answer in the Q&A, like what for you is confident? And I think it's so important to understand what it is and where it comes from so that you can start to develop it today. Because it's not only about how you see yourself, it's not only about a feeling that you want to get to when you lose the weight, but you want to kind of create that confidence all along the way. Because I know not only do you want to lose weight, but you want to lose weight and keep it off forever. And the way you keep it off forever is because you have the confidence in your ability. You have that relationship with yourself where you trust yourself no matter what, that you'll never put the weight back on. And it all comes from the confidence. So I don't want you to wait to develop it. Why not start to develop it now? And it goes hand in hand with losing the weight and keeping it off for good. So when I think about confidence, it's really that feeling that I generate. So for those of you that are new to these calls, I see some of you that have been here before, some of you that haven't. We use the model, and I'll go through it briefly, but I use that. That's the primary kind of foundational coaching tool that I use. I have tons of other tools that I use, but this is kind of the underlying. And so I'm just going to walk you through it so you can start to see it visually as well as hear it and then think about it for yourself. So when I think about confidence, I think sometimes, and this for sure was true for me, that was like, confidence is like something I get when I meet a certain goal. Confidence is something I get when I'm at my goal weight, when I make a certain amount of money, when I have a certain job title, when I'm married, when I have a certain number of kids, all of the things. But it's something that actually is the thing that creates more of what we want in our life. So when I think about confidence, it's a feeling of self-confidence. Like we think it comes from the circumstances that we have. So if you remember, this is really just a way to describe how the world works in a very, I love it because it's analytical, because I can see it on paper, because it kind of like slows my mind down. My mind is someone that just like, it just goes like all the time. And so it really just can like bring it back and show us exactly what's happening so we can see if what we're doing, what we're thinking, what we're creating, if what we're feeling, if it serves us or not. And so if you'll remember, there's 5 lines. The first line is the C, which is the circumstance. That's the facts of the world. There's no opinion, there's no perception, there's no interpretation. It just is like as factually as we could describe it. So it might be the number on the scale, like maybe the color of like my hair, the color of my eyes, that I'm a human, right? Something very neutral and fact-based. And then we all have thoughts about those circumstances. And how our brain works is when we have a thought, there are neurons that fire together, and they then send a signal to another part of our brain, to our hypothalamus, that releases peptides in our body that creates an emotion, that creates a feeling that we actually physically feel. And all of our action is driven from a feeling that we either are in, a feeling that we want to avoid, or a feeling that we want to feel. And then all of that action and inaction, of course, creates all of the results we have in our lives. So when we think about the feeling of confidence, of feeling self-confident, where does it come from? We think it comes from, and we're kind of socialized, I think, to believe that it comes from what we look like. It comes from the number on the scale. It comes from how much money we make. But we all know think of someone in your life that you've met that they just have like so much self-confidence. And again, not in an arrogant way, but they like by society's standards, they have no reason to be confident. So ask yourself, like, where does it come from, right? And we can see that it comes from how we think, but I want to show you how starting to develop that now will actually help you become naturally thin. It will actually help you get to your goal and get there faster, and then stay there for the rest of your life. And why it's so important that you don't want to wait to get there. So ask yourself, what are some thoughts that you think of about yourself that you have confidence around? And so for most people that I work with, we're confident maybe in one area of our life or multiple areas of our life, and then we might have some lack of confidence in other areas. And so when we're developing this, especially with our body image and especially with how we see ourselves in the mirror, our relationship with food, when we're eating, what we're eating, all of the things, we can borrow some of that confidence from other areas and really use it in this relationship with food. And sometimes people will tell me, and so if you, I saw a couple of you just joined. So we're going through kind of just an exercise that I find very helpful for my clients. But if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A box and I will go through and answer those. It can be related to this, it can be related to anything. Nothing is ever off limits. And if you want to come on and be coached live with me, we can actually have a two-way conversation. There's a little Q&A box or a little like virtual raise your hand button at the bottom of your screen. You can come on and we can talk. So when we're thinking about confidence, ask yourself, like, is there an area outside of losing weight? And then I'm going to show you why it's so important when it comes to losing weight to start to develop that confidence and not wait until you lose the weight, because it doesn't just like appear, that we develop that so that you can actually get to your goal weight and then keep it there. Because when I'm working with someone, so I work with my private clients one-on-one for 6 months, that really the whole time we're working on that confidence, because by the end of the 6 months, they're then at the point that they never worry about the weight coming back on. They're just like, of course, this is just who I am. This is just a part of me. But it all comes from that confidence all along the way. So ask yourself, like, what is a thought that you have that promotes a feeling for you of self-confidence? And so I'll give you some examples in my life, but one of them is like, I am an amazing, this is for my corporate career, CPA. So it'd be like, my circumstance would be Laura Dixon, CPA, right? When I used to think about my ability as a CPA, well, let me just move that so you can see a little bit better. I was like, I'm an amazing CPA. I know that. Not in an arrogant way, but just because of my ability, all of the thoughts that I had about myself of like, I know how to figure out absolutely anything. And just because I don't know it now doesn't mean I won't figure it out. I just like trusted in my ability to figure out anything in my corporate job, that I was like, no problem. I had so much confidence in that ability, even though I didn't have that confidence in my relationship with food. And so I borrowed a lot of that confidence in that area of my life to fuel me in my journey. So then when there would be times that I tried a diet, did another diet, maybe put some weight back on, and especially when I had started to tell myself, like, I am going to figure out a way to be naturally thin for life so that I don't have to worry about this anymore, that I kept coming back to, I know how to figure out anything. I might not know all of the ways right now. I might not know exactly how I'm going to do it, but I just believe enough in myself that I'm going to figure it out no matter what, because I for sure as shit know I'm not going to be struggling with this for the rest of my life. So then really asking yourself, like, where do you have some of that confidence? And put some of your thoughts where you have that, what areas of your life trigger that confidence for you, and what do you think about yourself in those situations or in those facets of your life that you could potentially borrow as you're starting to lose weight, as you're going through this journey. And I'm sure that for some of you, it's different areas that I'm sure other people are thinking as well. And like even thinking about having my first child. So my oldest is 3. Before I had him, I actually wasn't really nervous to be a mother. Like I wasn't nervous about having an infant. I wasn't nervous about all of the things, right? I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. I'd never been a mother before, but I just believed in my ability to figure out anything that I just had that confidence, and not in an arrogant way. I still read a lot of a lot of like books and all of the things, right? But I just knew, I believed enough in my ability without knowing exactly how I was going to do all of it, that I was able to figure it all out. And it completely changed my experience having a newborn baby. And so like for me, I don't think of having newborns as like being overly difficult. Not because they're not a lot of work, and not because they don't take a lot of time, not because I'm not up all night, but it's just the way I think about it so differently. And this all came from really changing how I thought about myself, especially when it comes to food and especially when it comes to my body image. And when I think about the work of developing the confidence with ourselves in our weight loss journey, and then just in our own being able to be comfortable in our own skin, to be able to be with ourselves, like that is to me the most like intimate work. Meaning like we have to really get to know ourselves in a way that will transcend into all areas of your life. It just can't not, because you're so changed by it, because you have all of that confidence. So then ask yourself, okay, when I'm feeling confident, what do I do? What do I not do? So I'll give you a brief example as a CPA, and then we'll talk about it with food and losing weight, and you can see how it will benefit you to start practicing this today. And then before we end, I'll make sure to talk about how do you, if you're like really far away from this, like I used to hate myself and tell myself I was like fat and ugly and it was never going to happen. And like there's something wrong with me and I'm a lazy and I'm a terrible human and all of the things. So like that was a pretty far stretch from feeling self-confident, how you can start to work your way there right now. So thinking about just like as a CPA, so picking whatever other area of your life that you have some confidence in, like, I mean, you could literally pick anything, like walking, right? Like, you know how to walk. You don't ever think like, oh, I don't know how to walk today. Even when you fall, you're not like, oh, I just like don't know how to walk. Like there are many areas of our life, like driving, holding your child, helping your child with homework, maybe some facet of your job, maybe some facet of your relationship with a partner or with a friend, or maybe you know you're a great sister or a great daughter. I know there's an area that you do feel confident in. That when you feel confident, what we don't do is I don't sit in self-doubt, which for me is like this spinning cycle that I just like really am just stuck in my head. And I figure things out. I don't worry about what other people think about me. Right? So there's a ton of other things that I do when I'm self-confident, but it's so much more productive than worry. The worry, the self-loathing, the self-pity, the guilt, the shame, like it just doesn't produce anything productive in our lives, because for so many of us, it's like this contracting feeling that we just like, our brain just like wants to shut down. We're just like, can I just go in my room and watch Netflix and eat all the food, right? So what all of that does is when we feel confident and when we start to practice this, is it actually promotes more self-confidence. So it's like we think, well, I'll just wait until I get to be a certain weight and then I'll have the confidence. But how we actually build that confidence is all along the way. And then as you start to get results, it just like creates more and more and more and more confidence. So I just am like solidifying that I'm an amazing CPA, right? Because I'm like getting shit done. I'm being productive. I'm figuring things out. I'm not sitting there not being productive. And it's the same thing when it comes to your weight loss journey. So tell me in the Q&A box, let me just check something here. Tell me in the Q&A box, where is one area that you have self-confidence? What is that for you? And what do you think about yourself in that area that produces the self-confidence? Because what I want you to see, especially when it comes to losing weight, is that what we often tell ourselves is, well, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to wait and feel confident when my circumstance is my goal weight. When I will reach my goal weight, then I'm going to feel confident. So what I want you to ask yourself is, okay, let's go to that place for a minute. Go to the place where you reach your goal weight. You're standing on the scale, you see your goal weight, and you're like, I just know, not only am I here, but I'm never going to lose the weight again. What would I think? Why would I be confident? What would be going through my mind? What would have changed for me? And so think about that thought that you then have when you see that number on the scale. Okay, so for me, it was 140 pounds. My thought was literally, and this changed so many areas of my life when I was able to actually get to my goal weight and stay there, was like, I can do, I'll try not to swear in case you have kids around, but like, I can do anything. I was like, if I can accomplish this, if I can get to my goal weight and keep it off, literally nothing I can't do. And so I knew that if I would, when I would get there, my thought would be, I can do anything. And so I started practicing that all along the way, because not only is it important to get you to your goal, but it's important to keep you there. So then this is like my current, kind of what happens in my current mind, is that when I feel confident, especially when it comes to my weight, all of the action I take is so different than when I was in self-loathing and pity and shame, which usually led to overeating and binging and like hating on myself, or maybe like restriction and then binging, right? Like all of that, which just has no productivity in helping you get to your goal. So when I feel self-confident in my relationship with myself and in my relationship with food, here is what happens for me. And I'll just write a couple down. I can go anywhere, and I trust I will never overeat. I'll put binge, because every once in a while, do I eat a little bit too much? Yes, but it's not like overeating in the way I used to eat. Like, I know no matter what, I will never want to overeat. I'm okay with being hungry. I'm okay being in any situation. And don't get me wrong, like, do I still have some social anxiety? Like, do I still have anxiety? Do I still have fear and self-doubt and like all of that? Like, of course. But in my relationship with myself and my relationship with food, I know that it's never going to be something that I have to like really, really struggle with. Now, are there times that it's easier than others? Yes, but it's like this relationship I just get to take with me everywhere because it's a part of me, that what ends up happening is I then end up I stay at 140 pounds. So this is not only how you get to your goal, is to start to change how you see yourself and start to change how you talk to yourself, is you get you to your goal, but it also keeps you there. Because if, and this will be kind of the last thing, and I'll read some of your comments in the Q&A, if it was the number on the scale that produced the confidence, you would never put the weight back on. Like, really think about that. If it was reaching the number on the scale, there have been times in your life that you have been that number on the scale, whether it was when you were 10 or 20 or whatever age. Like, there was a time you've been that number on the scale. And if that was what produced the confidence, you would then just have the confidence. It wouldn't have left you. And so, and most of us have done so many diets that we've like lost weight, we put it back on, lost weight, put it back on, all of that. And so it's not the number on the scale that produces the confidence. And the other thing I want you to see as well is it also makes the journey like so much more enjoyable. And because you enjoy it all along the way, you never fear putting weight back on. And then ironically, or not really ironically, you keep it off. And like, that is like so magical to me that now I don't have to worry about losing weight. And I also never worry about it coming back on. All right. So Joe, you said I am confident in my job. So one thing I would do is with whatever you pick in your job, be like, okay, so your circumstance would be even like get as specific as possible. Like maybe I'm a nurse at this hospital, or maybe I am an attorney at this law firm, or maybe I am an executive assistant at this corporation, whatever. I'm like totally making stuff up. But whatever your job is, be like, okay, here's the job that I do. And then get really specific about why you have the confidence. Like, what is the exact thought? Because I bet, I almost guarantee that that's something you can start to think about yourself in your relationship with food and in your relationship with yourself. And not even to like be like, oh, well, I'm just going to take, well, I can do anything, which I thought about as a CPA. And I started to believe that about myself in my weight loss journey, but I didn't believe it right away. So really start to think about like what you could start to believe about yourself in your journey to losing weight and becoming naturally thin. So you kind of know where your goalposts are. Like, okay, if I'm sitting here in self-loathing most of the time, right? We have tons of thoughts, like thousands and thousands of thoughts every day. But like, what are some of the kind of primary thoughts I think about myself when it comes to losing weight? And here I am today, and here's where I want to be. How can I start moving towards where I want to be? And I'll walk you through a little kind of exercise that you can do to think about that. Okay. So Hannah, I agree. It's like a freedom to do whatever I want and not overthink it. Yeah. And I assume, Hannah, you're talking about just the feeling of self-confident, that it's like, I get to literally show up and be me and not worry about what other people think of me. And now, does that mean at times people say things to me and you're like, like you get that immediate like, oh shit, like feeling rejected? Like, yeah, it still happens because I'm human, but it doesn't like close down my life. That I get to go anywhere and be myself wherever, whenever, just because I have that confidence. And now there's certain areas that I still work on that more actively than I do in other areas, but it all is like such a really big, important part of the journey. And especially when you think about, well, why do I want to lose the weight? If I want to be more confident, why don't I want to start feeling the confidence now and lose the weight? Like, you could start feeling that now and get to your goal weight. It's not like I have to wait and then. Okay, Elaine said my goal is 140 pounds too. I understand what you're saying. Thank you. You are so welcome. So really think about, for you, where are you now? What are kind of some common things you're thinking about now? We talked about that last week on, we talked through like some common emotions you're feeling, and then like what are the underlying thoughts behind that. And so if you want more on that, you can go watch kind of last week's replay, but I want to focus really on like developing and moving your brain towards having more of that self-confidence. So here's what I want you to do. And I'll ask you another question. I'm just going to get a sip of water. I'm going to ask you another question that I want you to put your answer in the Q&A while I kind of do this for you. How do you get more confidence? Like, how do you go about it? If I'm like, okay, go, have more confidence. Most people are like, no idea what you're talking about. Like, what do you mean? Like, how? People are usually like, I don't know, go make more money, right? Do all the things, do something outside of us. But like, if I said to you, okay, I want you to have more confidence, how would you go about doing it? Like, and like, just let your brains be like, I don't know. But, and I think I've said this before, but it's something I always tell my clients, like for many of them, a lot in the beginning, that when our brain says, I don't know, it's literally like, that's a really hard math problem. I'm just like, I don't want to think about it. That's going to take too much energy and effort. And anytime you want to say, I don't know, it's like all of your inner wisdom and intelligence just goes, like your brain literally just goes, let's turn off the computer right now. And so just keep asking yourself, literally, and there's no right or wrong answer. If you had to create more self-confidence, what would you do? What would you start doing different in your life? Okay. So I want you to identify first what your thought is that produces the confidence. So when you imagine getting on the scale and saying, for example, like Elaine said, I want to be 140 pounds too. When you imagine getting on the scale and seeing 140 pounds and feeling confident, what is the thought there in between kind of the number on the scale and your feeling in the model, right? So you get on the scale and then you have a thought about it. What is that thought that produces the confidence? And for each of you, find what that thought is and write it down, or like really like lock that in your brain and be like, all right, well, that's the end goal. That's where I want to get to. And I know I'm not there today because otherwise I would be at my goal weight, right? And so for me, it was, I want to be naturally thin for life. Like this is the last time I want to be naturally thin just to be part of who I am. And so it was some kind of variation of I'm naturally thin for life and I'm done with this. And that's where I wanted to get to. And where I started was like, I have no idea how to do this. My thought over and over was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to do this. Like I'm missing something. Something's wrong with me. All of the things. My confidence in my ability to lose weight was like not great. I just thought like, this is just something I'm going to struggle with for the rest of my life. I like food more than other people, all the things. It's never going to happen for me. I'm never going to be like that woman that I see or I admire or like that doesn't struggle with this. And so all of that is totally normal and totally fine. And just because those are thoughts that your brain offers up to you has no bearing on you becoming naturally thin. Like I promise you, whatever you've tried, whatever you've done in the past, all of the things, no matter your childhood, how you were raised, how you were taught to eat. I have some clients that have had eating disorders. Like you can actually change going forward that has no bearing on where you are necessarily right now or your past. But it's really important to just understand and be aware of it. So we're not going to like sit in it and dwell in it and try to figure out all of the reasons why right now, but just understand where you are and where you want to get to. And then, okay, so Elaine said, I'll just answer these first and then I'll kind of walk you through this. Elaine said, work on my self-esteem with a question mark. Release the fear of being seen. Yes. So how would you go about doing that? There are a couple things that we can do, and this is one of them, and then I'll give you some more examples. But when we think about work on my self-esteem, it's really just changing our thoughts about ourselves and not fearing all of the current thoughts we have. Because what happens so often is we're like, this feels terrible, like self-loathing and guilt and shame and like feeling trapped and like hating the way I look in the mirror. It all feels terrible. I want to like get out of it really quickly. And so what we try to do is it's kind of like we try to develop this new habit. So if we're trying to develop more confidence or we're trying to develop more self-esteem or we're trying to do all of that, we're like, okay, I'm going to do this new thing over here and I'm going to tell myself maybe like a mantra or something like that. But like we haven't really acknowledged where we are right now. So it's like, here's where we are. And then we're like, I'm just going to put a Band-Aid on top of kind of my current thought patterning without actually like taking a look at it and recognizing it. And so that would look like for me with this example, my brain's like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do this. This is never going to happen. I don't know how to do this. And every time those thoughts come up, I would be like, nope, shut up. Like, nope, 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 nope. In a very dismissive way. And be like, nope, I'm naturally thin. Nope, I'm naturally thin. And that's sort of like a typical mantra way of thinking about it. But what happens is that old belief is so strong in our brain, we've practiced those neural connections, that thought patterning more frequently. So they actually create like deeper grooves in our brain. And then we go try to develop the new one and it's just weaker at first. And so because we're not actually kind of letting go of the old thought patterning, they come at odds at some point. And then the old thought patterning will always win. just because it has a stronger connection. And so we have to actually let it go so that the new thought patterning has nothing to compete with. And so that's really when it becomes a part of you, and when it becomes easy and effortless is because you're no longer battling against something else. And so that's what I mean when I say your past or your current thought patterning has no bearing on whether or not you can get to your future, but you have to acknowledge it and see what it is. So I don't know how to do this with like kind of that thought patterning. And so kind of doing that in a way that was very dismissive, which tried that, doesn't actually get us to the place where it just becomes a part of us. And so what we do, and this is why I had you think about this in the first part of this call, is to see about some thoughts about yourself in other areas of your life that you can borrow. So I might have the thought, I don't know how to do this, if I go back to my example, when it comes to losing weight, but I definitely didn't have that thought when it came to my job, when it came to being a CPA. And so I then had the thought, something like, or more like, it could be possible I can figure this out. I can totally figure this out. And then it was like, I can figure out anything. And I'll walk you through how to like think about this for you. And then it was, I will be naturally thin for life. And then it was, I am naturally thin for life. So we have to actually, when we think about creating that increased self-confidence, we have to work our way there. And it doesn't necessarily take a long time. It can take not much time. It can take longer for some people. It all just depends. And it all depends on, I really think, like your willingness to practice this, to be aware of it, and to not fear all of the thoughts that you have about yourself and make them mean something about you. So what we do is when we have this gap between where we are in our self-confidence and where we want to be, that we kind of bridge it along the way. And so then what happens in your brain is, because you can easily believe each of these things, that it like takes the edge off a little bit each time. And then because you're not trying to jump to this kind of really kind of far distant new belief, your brain can latch onto it and create that new neural connection, and the old belief literally starts to go away. And so what happens is, when we sleep at night, like our brain goes and it actually prunes neural connections that don't fire together anymore. So if we have neural connections that we're not actively practicing, like when we sleep, it goes and it prunes them away. So literally over time, we don't have those same thoughts anymore. So it no longer feels like that's something I struggle with. Like, I never have the thought anymore, I'm never going to get out of this when it comes to my weight, ever. But not because I got to my goal weight, because I had gotten to my goal weight and still had that thought, but because I actually did this and actually retrained how my brain thinks. So what you want to do is top of the page where you are, bottom of the page where you want to be, and then you just find a thought that you could believe, that you could borrow from some other area of your life, and then that's what you're going to actively practice. And here's what it looks like for me. And so if you have some of these like bridging thoughts, put them in the Q&A that you can believe about yourself in other areas of your life, and I'll give you some feedback on them or some other things to think about as you work your way towards where you want to be. So if you think about the thought, I don't know how to do this, and then like every time that would come up, here's what it looked like when I started really working on my self-confidence, is it would look like, okay, like, yes, maybe that's true, but maybe also it's totally possible. What exactly did I write? It could be possible I totally figured this out. So maybe it is possible I don't know how to do this, but also maybe it's totally possible I figured this out. And I would borrow on my belief in my ability as a CPA. I'd be like, see, look, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. It's possible I could figure this out. I figured out a lot of hard things in my life. And I think about, if you have children, if you can figure out how to have children, and be a parent, you can for sure figure out really hard things. Like, you know how to do hard things. Most of us that have had a job, worked with other people, had challenging relationships, like, we all know how to do hard things at times. And so I would borrow that. For me, was really beneficial and motivating, that I would borrow on that belief. And every single time my brain was like, I don't know how to do this, which happened all the time, I'd be like, okay, maybe, but maybe also I totally figure out how to do this. And then what happens is, I'm not trying to be like, nope, I don't want to think that, like, that's a bad thought, because I also don't think any thoughts are good or bad. They're just thoughts. But, and does it or does it not serve you? But I would just be like, nope, like, in a compassionate way of like, that's just not what we're believing today. Like, kind of like, thank you for that. And it's totally possible that I figured this out. And then what happens is, and it depends on kind of where you are doing this, but like, this can happen very quickly for some people, and depending on kind of how willing you are to be okay with the old thought and the new thought. So then what happens is, this literally starts to go away. Like, my brain stops bringing it up to me, because I'm like, oh, it's totally possible I could figure this out. And then from it's totally possible I could figure this out, I was like, you know what? Actually, I can figure out anything, because not only could I figure this out, but when we start to believe this new thought, it could be possible I can totally figure this out, our brain will go to find all of the evidence to prove it true. So like, we always want to be right? Like, we all know that about people, about ourselves. Like, our brains intrinsically want to be right. So when you start feeding it a new thought and start practicing it, it will start to go to find how that's true in a bunch of areas of your life. So as soon as I was like, it could be possible I could totally figure this out, it was like, oh yeah, see there and see there and see there and see there. And it started to like accumulate this evidence, and I started to have more and more belief in myself. But then I got to the point that it was like, oh, actually, you know what? I can figure out anything. And then from I can figure out anything, I then was like, oh yeah, for sure. Cause like, I figured out this, and 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 all of the things. And then it very quickly, for me, it was like, once I went from here, step one, like this first thought, to the second one, it was like, whoosh, all the rest like came really quickly. And then I was like, from I can figure out anything, I was like, oh, I will for sure figure out how to be naturally thin for life. I'm not there yet, but like, I know for sure I will figure that out. And then I did. But not because I like found some secret diet or like some secret way of eating, but because I actually changed how I thought about myself and my relationship with myself. All right. So Hannah said, I can learn how to do this and listen to others who have done it. That's, I think, is so important. Like, one of the things I really did when we talk about like actions I took was just like inundate myself with like different ways of thinking. And what happened then for me is, then when I would be around people that kind of were in my old thought patterning of like, oh, it's fine, why do you even want to lose weight? Like, what's the point? Life's for living, and like, food is so amazing, and like, I don't care, all of that I was able to like distance myself from it. So I didn't watch my brain be like, oh yeah, that's right, and like kind of go back, which is what happens when we're trying to use willpower, because we haven't actually changed how our brain thinks, that we like come backwards. And so then the other thing, as you develop the self-confidence, you just don't really give a shit what other people think anymore. Like, I got a lot of flack from family and friends and a bunch of people of like, this is like, weird, like, why don't you want to eat the cake? Like, you loved cake, like blah, 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 all the things. And I finally just got to the point that like, and now I really don't care. I was like, totally don't care. Like, I meet one of my friends, we go to a workout class together, and then we often meet pre-COVID at a restaurant, and I would get tea, and I like bring my own coconut creamer, because I'm like, totally don't care, but I just like really like my own coconut creamer. Don't really care if you all judge me. It's totally fine, right? But we are so worried about other people's judgments that I think when you're saying listen to others who've done it before, it's so powerful, because then it's like you can almost like lean on their belief a little bit in like, oh, if she could do it, I can totally do it. And so if you think about for yourself, like, Hannah, find some examples or find some people, or whether it's me or someone else or other people in your life that, like, if they can do it, I can totally do it too. And like it's like the possibility of it creeps in, and then it just starts to grow and grow and grow. And so I would like probably maybe obsessively like read books and listen to podcasts and study and watch videos and documentaries and all the things. And it just like my mind, the more and more I believed, it was like, oh, it started to really become like inevitable for me. Like when I got to the point of I will be naturally thin for life, I was like, it's almost as good as done at this point. All right. Hannah also said, I can advise myself of a better belief or that my thoughts aren't true. I think you meant to say, can I advise myself of a better belief? So I think what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, Hannah, put in another comment, that we have thoughts that are often thought errors. Like they present as thoughts, and like we get to decide what we want to believe. Like this probably took me a year for this to like sink in before I like really now I'm like, oh. And then there's some areas of my life actually I don't quite believe this yet, even though I intellectually know it's true, that we get to believe whatever the hell we want. Like you could believe anything. So if you think about any thought that you could believe, why do you want to sit in self-loathing? Right? And we have cultural ways of thinking and societal ways that are like, well, this is just kind of what a good person does, or this is just what like we should do, or this is just what we learned from our parents or from our partner or from whoever, right? But so many of us have never questioned any of our belief system before. Like, for example, some people have never even questioned that, like, of course I can be naturally thin. Like I used to be like, well, I mean, I'm 5'11". I'm just big boned. That's just part of who I am. That's kind of where I came from. And even though neither of my parents are big boned, it literally was like something I told myself for years of like, I'm just big boned. I'm never going to actually be naturally thin. It's just not going to happen for me. It's just not a part of my life. Like all of those thoughts felt so true. But if I could tell myself absolutely anything, if I could actually believe any thought I wanted to ever, why would I decide to sit in those thoughts? Why not believe I could totally be naturally thin? And most of the time, we don't want to try to believe something different because we're like, well, if I don't get there, if I don't get to where I want to be, if I believe it's possible for me to be naturally thin and I don't ever actually like realize that in my life, then I'm going to be disappointed. But what you're doing right now by not believing that is just being disappointed all day, every day, all along the way. And also, like your chances then of getting there are like slim to none. So we're like, well, I don't want to be disappointed at some point in the future. So even though I could believe anything I want, I'm not going to believe that because I'm like preventing myself from feeling disappointed. But the alternative is just you're just feeling disappointed right now. So why not totally believe something that feels amazing and feels so much better all along the way, and it will be what gets you there. So like this is a thought that's, I'd say, within the last maybe like year or two of my life that I like really work on. And it's like, it's easier in some areas than others. And so we have about 10 minutes left. So if you have any more questions, put them in and I will try to answer them all before we're done. But this is something that I really practice. That we all have like a little superpower in that we all get to decide what we want to believe. It feels like what we believe is just like it like came upon us and it just is what it is and it's never going to change. And we don't get to actually decide. But literally, we can decide to believe anything. And so if you a coach I work with, she talks about like if there's a platter of thoughts, if you imagine, I think she talks about, I'm trying to think about where she said this, but she was talking about being at a really fancy party. She's like, imagine being at a fancy party and there's someone walking around with hors d'oeuvres on this like amazing big silver platter. And she's like, imagine that it's all the thoughts you could think of. And if you actually get to decide what you want to believe, why wouldn't you want to believe more of what feels amazing? Now, does it mean you're going to feel amazing every minute of every day? Like, no, because we're all human. But for the first time, really, in our humanity, I read this book twice now. It's called The Big Leap. I always want to say Gary, but I'm pretty sure it's Gay Hendricks is his name who wrote it. And he just talks about how for the first time in our humanity, we don't have a lot of the fear that was very real for us before, like as humans. We're all sitting in houses, and I'm not talking about if you are, really struggling with poverty or for someone that's homeless, but for a lot of us here that are sitting in houses that have access to a grocery store, that have a job, and we may still have some money fear, but the real fear that we have today comes from the fear of like being eaten by a tiger. Like that fear kept us alive. And so we still have a lot of that same fear, a lot of those same thoughts that just don't serve us in our life anymore. And we've gotten to this place in humanity that we don't need to feel stressed all day. Like the stress response that we used to feel as very like primal animals living out in the wild kept us alive, and it was super useful and super beneficial. But the chronic stress all day that we feel in our job or as a mother or in a relationship, like we don't need to feel that anymore to stay alive. And it's actually doing the opposite, right? It's killing us, and it's really like not helping us be more productive. And so if we get to decide to believe whatever we want, which we do, why not choose something that is so much more empowering, that feels so much more powerful, that I'm never going to get out of this, or I don't know what to do? Okay. I'm totally going to butcher your name, and I'm sorry. Is it Angeli? Angeli. I think maybe. Sorry if I said that wrong. So she said, sorry if you answered this already, but how much weight did you lose? So I lost a little over 50 pounds and in my own journey. And I went through this like up, down, up, down, up, down cycle of like the same kind of 30 to 35 pounds, but from my heaviest to where I am now. Well, it's like actually now it's like closer to like 55, maybe 60 pounds. I was at about 195. Now I'm a little under 140. And I lost that before kids. And then after each of my kids, I lost the weight within a couple months after that. Oh, perfect, Angeli. Amazing. So before we end, I'll kind of leave you with one more thing to really think about, and one more way to practice this is when you're thinking about practicing that self-confidence, you can use, if you get on the scale every morning, and maybe we'll do a separate call about this. Like, first of all, guys, I love the scale. I used to like hate the scale. There was periods of years that I didn't get on the scale. Like we've had a very hateful relationship, but I love the scale, not because of the number that it tells me, but because it's completely neutral data. And when I'm working with clients, it brings up all of the thoughts. It's like this immediate trigger that just like brings up all of the thoughts. And it's like, we write them down and we're like, perfect. Now we know where we're starting at, and now we can figure out where we're going to. So a really good way to do this exercise, if you're like, well, I don't know exactly what I'm thinking about my weight that's maybe keeping me stuck, and if I want to have more confidence, you might know where you want to get to. But when you get on the scale, see all the shit that your mind tells you about yourself and your ability and what you think about yourself. And you're like, oh, that's what I think. And so then what happens is you can use that as a daily exercise, or every time you look in the mirror, every time you see a picture, every time you go. I used to do this when I was working, when I would go to the bathroom and there's like, the mirror with all the things, that I would come out and like literally, I didn't like stop and pause and like make it a big thing, but I was just like in my mind, I was like, oh, okay. My brain's like, you're fat, you don't know what you're doing, you're trapped, all of these things. And I'd be like, okay, but maybe it's totally possible I do actually get there. Maybe it's totally possible I do this. And so I would use that trigger of the mirror, the scale, going to the bathroom, whatever, as like just like a practice to like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna like gently guide my brain back to, well, but maybe maybe I don't know what I'm doing, but maybe I do actually get there. Maybe it's totally possible for me, because look at all these other people that have done it. All right, let me just see. I hope you all found this super helpful. And for any of you that are interested in working with me, I have a few spots open for one-on-one coaching. So how I really work with people on a one-on-one basis is we meet every week and we really implement this in your life so that it is the new way of thinking, so that you've completely rewired your brain, so that after 6 months, we work together for 6 months. After that, we're done. It is a part of you. It's no longer something you struggle with. It's no longer something you're doing. It's just part of who you are. So if you're interested in working with me one-on-one, or interested in learning more about what that would be like, what that would look like, the investment, all of the things, you can go over to lauradixoncoaching.com, click on the Work With Me tab, and then there's also a link to schedule a consultation with me. And so that consult call is really for us to just understand where you are, where you want to be, and how I would walk you to getting to being naturally thin at whatever that is for you. And so for me, naturally thin is just about being in a body that feels like I'm meant to be in this body, feeling like I'm really at the weight I'm meant to be at. Not by any like societal standards, but just like genuinely knowing that in all of my being, and then being able to stay there effortlessly and not feeling restricted or deprived or anything like that for the rest of my life. So I will talk with you all soon. I hope you all have an amazing weekend. I cannot believe it's Friday already. So for those of you here in the US, if you have the rest of your workday, have a great rest of your workday. For those of you in the UK and Ireland, have an amazing weekend, and I'll talk with you all soon.